This is the real-time rows, and we're being asked to find the roots of an equation. And this is you need to recognize this is a quadratic equation. It has an x squared term, an x term, and just a numerical term, or an x to the 0 power term. So you can find the roots of this by factoring. And most people have, and what you should do for factoring quadratic equations like this is have a process in mind that allows you to figure out what the factors will be. And so I'll give you one if you don't have it, which is, let's assume that the factors of this are two binomials. They start out with an x term and they end with plus something. It might be plus, might be minus, but there's some numerical only term. And mostly what we're trying to figure out is what goes in these buckets. And the rules of what go in that bucket are when you multiply. So let's say these two unknowns. If you multiply the unknowns, you should get the numerical term. And if you add the unknowns, you should get the x term. I should say the coefficient on the x term. So this is what most people have memorized when it comes to factoring. This is kind of a shortcut. And so let's look at what we've got. So the x term has a -5 on it. And the numerical term is just a 6. So what we need to do is come up with two numbers. What two numbers add to -5 and multiply to -6? Right? And you can kind of just go through lists, like what numbers multiply to give you -6. You could do 1 and -6. You could do 6 and -1. You could do 2 and -3. You could do 3 and -2. You see how like all of these, if we multiply them, all of them equal -6? And let's try to stick to integers. So I started picking with integers. And what are all the cases where you can add two integers and you'll end up with -5? So let's actually look at these and say, do these work? So 1 and -6 actually does give you -5. So if I add them, 1 plus -6, that does equal -5. So that one works. So that's going to be our answer. If I add 6 and -1, that equals 5, which does not work. If I add 2 and -3, I get -1. That does not work. If I do 3 and -2, that does not work because I get 1. So the only row that satisfies both criteria is when I have 1 and -6. So let's add that in. So this will be x plus 1 and x minus 6. So check it again. If we multiply these two terms, 1 and -6, do we get -6? Yes. If we add them, 1 plus -6, do we get -5? Yes. So this is the correctly factored quadratic equation. Now we have to do a little bit of translation to get the answer. They said find the roots of the equation. The roots are the values of x that make this true. So this statement here is true if you plug in a value for x, you evaluate this expression, and it equals 0. So when will that happen? That will occur when either one of these is equal to 0. So if x plus 1 equals 0, that'll make this expression 0, right? Or if x minus 6 is equal to 0, that'll make it 0. So let's solve for x. X could equal -1, or x could equal 6. So those are your two roots.